I'm standing in my childhood bedroom on Christmas morning watching my father's face drain of color as he reads something on his phone. My mother clutches my brother Mason's arm while he whispers desperately about damage control. The Georgetown University acceptance letter sits prominently on my desk next to a printed email confirmation that changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 days to the moment I still believed my brother walked on water. December 21st. The smell of my mother's pot roast filled our suburban Massachusetts home, mixing with the pine scent of the Christmas tree Dad had put up the weekend before. I was setting the table for our traditional pre-holiday family dinner when Mason breezed through the front door, still wearing his Massachusetts General Hospital scrubs, looking every bit the successful doctor everyone believed him to be. "There's my brilliant son." Mom practically sprinted from the kitchen to hug him, leaving me holding a stack of plates mid-air. "How was your shift, honey?" "Exhausting but rewarding," Mason said, flashing that perfect smile that had charmed teachers, professors, and apparently now hospital administrators. "We had a complex case today that required some creative problem solving. Used some of the research protocols I developed." Dad looked up from his laptop. He was always working even during family time and beamed with pride. "That's my boy. Always thinking, always innovating." I continued setting the table, invisible as usual. 21 years old, and I'd perfected the art of being background noise in my own family. "Emma, sweetie, you put the forks on the wrong side," Mom said, not even looking at me as she guided Mason to his usual seat at the head of the table. The seat that used to be Dad's until Mason graduated from Harvard Medical School. I moved the forks without comment. Pick your battles, I'd learned. This wasn't worth fighting over. Dinner started the way it always did. Mason talking parents, listening in rapt attention, me eating quietly while mentally reviewing my thesis notes. "So I have some exciting news," Mason announced, pausing for dramatic effect. He'd always had a flair for performance. "The Journal of Medical Research is publishing my paper on protein synthesis mechanisms. The editor said it's some of the most innovative work they've seen in years." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Protein synthesis mechanisms. That was... Wait. "Mason, that's incredible." Dad stood up to shake his hand. Actually stood up. When I'd made Dean's List last semester, I got a distracted good job while Dad was on a conference call. "Tell us about it," Mom urged, her eyes shining. "What's the research about?" Mason leaned back, settling into what I called his professor mode. "Well, it's pretty technical, but essentially I've discovered novel pathways in cellular regeneration. The way proteins synthesize under certain conditions could revolutionize how we approach tissue repair and even cancer treatment." Something cold settled in my stomach. Those words. Those specific words. "That sounds similar to what Emma's been working on for her thesis," Dad said absently, more focused on his phone than the conversation. "Isn't that right, Emma?" All eyes turned to me. I felt my face flush. Yeah, similar area," I managed. Mason's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. "Great minds think alike, little sis, though obviously the clinical applications I'm developing are on a different level than undergraduate research. No offense." "None taken," I lied. Mom patted Mason's hand. "Emma, you should ask your brother for advice on your thesis. He could probably help you improve it significantly." The irony of that statement would haunt me for days. "Actually, Mom, I'd love to see what you're working on," Mason said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Maybe I could give you some pointers, help you avoid common mistakes." "That's okay," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I'm pretty far along. My advisor, Professor Chen, says it's in good shape." "Professor Chen." Mason's interest sharpened. "From the State University Biochem Department." I nodded, suddenly wary. "Huh. I thought I saw him at a conference last month. Nice guy." Mason's tone was casual, but I caught something underneath it. Something calculating. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Mason kept asking subtle questions about my research timeline, my methodology when I planned to defend my thesis. Each question felt like a probe testing for information. "Emma, why can't you be more like your brother?" Mom said during dessert, not for the first time in my life. "Mason was already published multiple times by your age." I bit my tongue. Literally bit down until I tasted copper. "Mom, don't be too hard on her," Mason said magnanimously. "Not everyone can handle the pressure of real academic achievement. Emma's doing the best she can with her limitations." Limitations. The word hung in the air like a slap. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Mason's right. We should have realistic expectations. Emma's worked hard to maintain her grades even if she's not quite at Mason's level. My 4.0 GPA apparently didn't count because it was from a state school, not Harvard. I excused myself early, claiming I had work to do at the library. Mom barely acknowledged my goodbye, too busy listening to Mason's story about a complicated surgery he'd observed. Dad waved absently already back to his laptop. As I grabbed my coat, I heard Mason's voice drift from the dining room. You know, that research Emma's doing sounds pretty advanced for an undergrad. Are you sure she's not getting too much help from her professor, academic integrity and all that? My blood ran cold. Was he really trying to preemptively discredit my work? I left without saying anything, but Mason's words echoed in my head during the entire drive to campus. The university library was nearly empty at 9 p.m., just the way I liked it. Most students had already left for winter break, but I'd stayed behind to put the finishing touches on my thesis. 8 months of work, countless sleepless nights, and groundbreaking research that even Professor Chen called remarkable for an undergraduate. I'd been studying protein synthesis mechanisms in cellular regeneration, specifically how certain enzyme interactions could potentially accelerate healing and even target cancer cells. It was complex, innovative work that I'd developed entirely on my own. Or so I thought. I was in the final stage, cross-referencing recent publications to ensure my work was truly original. Standard academic practice. I pulled up the Journal of Medical Research's latest issue, the same journal Mason had mentioned at dinner, and started scanning through the articles. And there it was. Novel Pathways in Protein Synthesis and Cellular Regeneration by Dr. Mason Mitchell, M.D. My hands started shaking before I even opened the PDF. The abstract was familiar, very familiar. I pulled up my own thesis document, placing them side by side on my laptop screen. The interaction between ATP synthase and mitochondrial protein complexes demonstrates unexpected efficiency in cellular regeneration under controlled conditions. That was my opening paragraph, word for word. My vision blurred. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just the abstract. Maybe we'd accidentally used similar language for common concepts. I scrolled down. The introduction was mine. The methodology section, my methodology including a specific technique I developed myself after months of trial and error, was there explained in my exact words. 3 full pages of my thesis published under Mason's name 6 months ago. 6 months ago. I checked my own file timestamps. I'd written that section 8 months ago, 2 months before Mason's publication date. The library suddenly felt too small, too cold. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and checked my university email account. There, a notification from 7 months ago about a login from an unfamiliar IP address. I'd ignored it at the time, assuming it was a system glitch. Mason had been home for Thanksgiving that year. He'd asked to use my laptop because his phone was dead and he needed to check his email. I'd given him the password without thinking twice. Why would I? He was my brother. Oh my God, I whispered to the empty library. I spent the next 2 hours systematically going through every section of my thesis, comparing it to Mason's published paper. The evidence was undeniable. He'd taken my work, my original research, my innovative conclusions about enzyme interactions, and published it as his own. But how did he access my files? I'd never shared them with anyone except Professor Chen. I pulled up my university account login history. There it was, multiple logins from Boston IP addresses during times when Mason had visited. He'd used my password to access my research drafts, downloading them months before I'd officially submitted anything. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My brother, the golden child, the Harvard Medical School graduate, had stolen my research. And he'd done it deliberately, carefully, probably thinking his little sister would never notice, or would be too scared to say anything. I printed everything. The side-by-side comparisons, the login records, the timestamps. My printer churned out page after page of evidence while my mind raced. If Mason stole this work, what else had he taken? I opened a new browser tab and started searching. Mason's high school science fair project, the one that had won first place and earned him a scholarship to Harvard. I remembered helping him with the initial research. I'd been a freshman eager to bond with my older brother. I found the project description online, part of the state science fair archives. Then I started searching academic databases for similar research from around that time. It took me 20 minutes to find a paper published by a graduate student at Northwestern University 2 weeks before Mason's science fair submission. The methodology was nearly identical. My stomach churned. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. I looked at the clock, 11:47 p.m. I'd been in the library for almost 3 hours and I'd only scratched the surface. But I already knew the truth. Mason Mitchell, the pride of our family, was a fraud. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my tiny dorm room, the one I'd moved to after convincing my parents I needed to live on campus for my research, and systematically destroyed my illusions about my brother. I started with a timeline. Every major academic achievement Mason had claimed since high school. There were more than I'd realized. Science fair's research papers, his undergraduate thesis at Harvard, multiple publications during medical school, and now his residency research. By 3 a.m., I'd found 3 more instances of clear plagiarism in high school and college. Mason had been stealing academic work for at least 7 years. But how did he get away with it? The answer was depressingly simple. He was smart about it. He targeted obscure sources, international publications, that American professors might not know student research from small universities' preliminary work that hadn't been widely publicized yet. And he was charming. That was the real key. Mason had perfected the art of seeming brilliant while actually being a skilled thief. I needed help. At 7 a.m., I texted my cousin Claire, the only family member who'd ever really understood me. "Me, can we talk?" "It's important. Claire coffee. At 9. Something wrong. Me everything." We met at a small cafe off campus. Claire, 3 years older than me and working on her PhD in chemistry at MIT, took one look at my face and ordered us both large coffees and muffins I probably wouldn't eat. "Emma, you look terrible. What's going on?" I pulled out my laptop and showed her everything. The side-by-side comparisons, the timestamps, the evidence of systematic fraud spanning 7 years. Claire's expression shifted from concern to shock to cold anger. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "Mason's been doing this since high school. At least, maybe longer. I stopped searching because I was too exhausted." She studied the evidence carefully, her scientific mind analyzing the data. "This is ironclad, Emma. The timestamps alone would be enough, but you have login records too. He's done." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" That was the question that had kept me awake all night. "I don't know. If I report this, it'll destroy him. His medical license, his career, everything." "Emma." Claire reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "He stole your work. He's been stealing work from people for years, and he's using fraudulent research in a hospital treating actual patients. What if his stolen research is wrong? What if someone gets hurt?" I hadn't thought about that. The idea made me feel sick. "You know what will happen if you report this," Claire continued gently. "Your parents will take his side. They always do." She was right. I knew she was right. The golden child could do no wrong in their eyes. "I need more evidence," I said finally. "If I'm going to do this, I need it to be so clear, so undeniable, that even Mom and Dad can't ignore it." Claire nodded slowly. "Okay, what do you need?" "Help me find his other victims. If Mason's been stealing this long, there have to be other people whose work he's taken. Classmates, colleagues, research partners." "On it. I know people at Harvard Medical School. Let me make some calls." Over the next 2 days, while my family prepared for Christmas and assumed I was just being my usual antisocial self, Claire and I built a case. We found Dr. Rachel Santos, a former medical school classmate of Mason's. She'd developed innovative research on pediatric cardiology, then taken a medical leave for a family emergency. When she returned, she discovered that Mason had published her preliminary research under his own name, excluding her from any credit. She'd tried to report it, but Mason had convinced the department that they'd been collaborating, and there was a misunderstanding about authorship. His word against hers, and he'd been more convincing. I gave up fighting it, Dr. Santos told me over the phone, her voice bitter. Mason was the department darling. I was the woman who'd taken a leave for personal issues. Guess who they believed? "I'm so sorry," I said. "Are you going to report him?" "I'm considering it." "Good. Someone needs to. He's a predator, Emma. And predators don't stop until someone stops them." We found 2 more victims, medical students Mason had collaborated with, then systematically excluded from publications. In both cases, he'd used his charm and connections to make himself seem like the sole contributor, while they'd done significant portions of the work. One of them, Michael Torres, was brutally honest. "Your brother is a sociopath. He looked me in the eye, smiled, and stole 6 months of my research." Then, he got promoted while I struggled to graduate because I didn't have enough publications. The system protected him because he was brilliant. Except he wasn't brilliant. He was a thief. By December 23rd, I had evidence of systematic academic fraud spanning 7 years affecting at least 6 people that we could confirm, and probably many more we couldn't find. I also had something else, a friend in the university IT department, Jake Martinez, who owed me a favor from when I'd helped him pass organic chemistry last year. "Emma, I could get in serious trouble for this," Jake said when I asked him to check login records more thoroughly. "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. My brother has been stealing my research. I need to prove how he accessed my account." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Give me an hour." 90 minutes later, he handed me a USB drive. "Everything's on there. Login records, IP addresses, timestamps. Emma, your brother didn't just access your account a few times. He's been systematically hacking into it for the past year, like regularly. He even set up an automated script to download any new files you created." The room tilted. "What kind?" "He's been monitoring your work in real time. Every time you saved a new draft, he got a copy. This isn't just theft, Emma. This is premeditated, systematic data theft." I thought I'd run out of ways to be shocked by Mason's behavior. I was wrong. December 23rd, 10 a.m., Mason's childhood bedroom now converted into what my mother called his achievement shrine. Medical journals lined the shelves. Framed diplomas covered the walls. Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Medical School certificates from conferences and awards ceremonies. Every surface told the story of a brilliant medical career. Except it was all a lie. I knocked on the door evidence folder tucked under my arm. "Come in," Mason called, sounding distracted. He was sitting at his desk working on his laptop, probably stealing someone else's research, I thought bitterly. "Hey, Emma, what's up?" I closed the door behind me and placed the folder on his desk. "We need to talk about your Journal of Medical Research publication." He glanced at the folder without opening it. "What about it?" "This is my work, Mason. My thesis, my research, my words." I opened the folder and pointed to the highlighted sections. Word for word. For a moment, just a moment, I saw genuine surprise flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by amusement. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Emma, you're being ridiculous. Research builds on previous work all the time. It's called standing on the shoulders of giants." "This isn't building on previous work. This is theft. You copied 3 full pages verbatim." He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say there are some similarities. Who do you think people will believe, me, the Harvard Medical School graduate with multiple publications and a residency at one of the best hospitals in the country, or you, a state school undergrad who's struggling through her degree?" The casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a slap. This was my brother, the person I'd looked up to my entire life. I have timestamps on all my files. I continued pulling out more documents. Email drafts, document histories, everything proving I wrote this months before your publication date. I also have login records showing you accessed my university account without authorization. His smile faded slightly. "You've been spying on me. You've been stealing from me." Mason stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller. He was taller than me, broader. He'd always used his physical presence to intimidate when charm didn't work. "Look, little sister," he said, his voice dropping to something colder. "You're clearly jealous of my success. It's sad, really. Maybe you should focus on your own mediocre achievements instead of trying to sabotage mine." "I'm not trying to sabotage you. I'm trying to stop you from stealing my work. And if you're thinking of making accusations," he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "remember that I'm about to become a doctor while you're still struggling through undergraduate classes. Who do you think people will believe? Who do you think Mom and Dad will believe?" He moved closer, looming over me. I held my ground even though my heart was racing. "Besides," Mason added, his voice soft and dangerous, "if you cause problems for me, I'll just tell Mom and Dad that you're having some kind of breakdown. They already think you're unstable compared to me. One word from me about your mental state, and they'll have you in therapy faster than you can say plagiarism." I stood there absorbing his words, feeling pieces of my worldview crumbling. The brother I had admired was not only a fraud, but willing to destroy me to protect his lies. The parents who had raised me were so blinded by favoritism that they would believe his word over evidence. "Is that all?" Mason asked, sitting back down and turning to his laptop. Because I have actual work to do. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Someone who had been manipulating me, manipulating our family, manipulating everyone for years. Yeah, I said quietly. That's all. I left his room, closing the door softly behind me. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Mason had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed I would back down, that I would be too scared or too desperate for family approval to fight back. He was wrong. As I walked downstairs, I could hear my mother in the kitchen humming Christmas carols while she prepared dinner. My father was in his office on yet another conference call. Everything looked normal, peaceful, perfect. But I knew the truth now. This family, this perfect suburban life, was built on lies and favoritism. And I had two choices: stay silent and let Mason continue his fraud, or expose the truth and lose everything. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. At the top of my inbox was a message I'd received 2 weeks ago, one I'd been too scared to fully process. Subject: Georgetown University. Graduate admission decision. I'd applied secretly 6 months ago, after the first time Mason had made me feel worthless at a family dinner. I'd used my original research, the work I'd done entirely on my own, and submitted it to their independent review process. The email confirmed what I'd been too nervous to fully acknowledge. I'd been accepted with a full academic scholarship to their combined MD-PhD program. Georgetown wanted me, not because of my last name, not because of family connections, but because my research was genuinely groundbreaking. Mason could threaten me all he wanted. He could try to convince our parents I was unstable. But he couldn't take away what I'd earned through actual work and actual talent. I had a decision to make, and I had 2 days to make it. Christmas Eve was tomorrow, and our extended family would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. Everyone who had watched Mason be praised and me be dismissed for years. I thought about Dr. Santos, whose career had been damaged by Mason's theft. I thought about Michael Torres, who'd struggled to graduate because Mason had stolen his research. I thought about patients at Massachusetts General Hospital who were being treated based on protocols Mason had developed from stolen, possibly flawed research. And I thought about myself, 21 years old, with a choice between comfort and integrity. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I opened my laptop and started preparing evidence packets, one for each family member who would be at dinner tomorrow. Professional, organized, undeniable. If Mason wanted to play this game, fine. But he'd been playing against someone who had nothing left to lose. And that made me far more dangerous than he realized. The smell of ham and roasted vegetables filled the house as cars began pulling into the driveway. I watched from my bedroom window as my extended family arrived: grandfather Robert and grandmother Helen in their ancient Buick, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Michael, with my cousin Claire, various other aunts and uncles whose names I'd learned to say at exactly the right moments during holidays. 15 people in total. 15 witnesses to what I was about to do. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'd dressed carefully, a deep green sweater that Mom had given me last Christmas. I wanted her to remember she'd once cared enough to pick something out for me. Jeans, minimal makeup. I looked younger than 21, I knew. That was part of Mason's advantage. He looked successful, polished adult. I looked like a kid playing at being serious. But I had something he didn't: the truth. I picked up my messenger bag, heavy with the 15 evidence packets I'd spent all night preparing. Each one was customized with the recipient's name professionally bound with a personalized cover letter explaining why I was sharing this information with them specifically. For grandfather Robert, I'd emphasized the engineering principle: structures built on false foundations always collapse eventually. For Uncle Michael, the lawyer, I'd focused on the legal implications of academic fraud. For Claire, I'd simply written "thank you for believing me when I needed it most." I could still back out. I could go downstairs, smile through dinner, let Mason bask in his glory, and quietly transfer to Georgetown without ever exposing him. My parents would eventually notice I'd left, but by then it would be too late for them to stop me. But Dr. Santos's words echoed in my head. Predators don't stop until someone stops them. And Michael Torres. The system protected him because he was brilliant. Except he wasn't brilliant. He was a thief. I thought about the patients at Massachusetts General Hospital, trusting their lives to protocols developed from stolen research. Research that Mason might not even fully understand because he hadn't done the actual work. No, backing out wasn't an option. I picked up my bag and headed downstairs. The dining room was loud with conversation and laughter. Someone had put on Christmas music, Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases. The table was set for 15 candles flickering my mother's good china gleaming. Mason held court at one end already, surrounded by admiring relatives. He was telling some story about the hospital, his hands gesturing animatedly, his face lit up with that charismatic smile that had fooled everyone for so long. "Emma," Grandmother Helen spotted me and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and peppermint. "We were wondering when you'd come down. Your mother said you've been locked in your room working on some project." "Something like that," I said, hugging her back. "Always so studious," she said fondly. "Just like your brother." I managed to smile. Dinner started with the usual rituals. Dad said grace, a perfunctory thing he did because Grandma Helen expected it. Mom brought out course after course, salad soup, the main ham with all the trimmings. Everyone ate and talked and laughed. I barely touched my food. My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety and determination. Mason was in his element, entertaining everyone with hospital anecdotes that were probably half fiction. I watched him work the room, noting how he made eye contact with each person, how he modulated his voice to sound humble while clearly fishing for compliments. "The attending physician actually asked me to present the case at next month's conference," he was saying. "Apparently my approach was innovative enough that they want to use it as a teaching example." "That's wonderful, Mason," Aunt Sarah beamed at him. "You must be so proud." "I just try to do my best," Mason said with false modesty. "Though I have to credit my education. Harvard really prepared me well for this level of work." Of course he had to mention Harvard. He always did. My mother waited until dessert was being served, her famous apple pie, before making her announcement. "Everyone, I have some exciting news to share," she said, standing up and tapping her wine glass to get attention. "Mason's research is being considered for publication in another prestigious journal. The hospital administration says his work on protein synthesis could revolutionize treatment protocols." Protein synthesis. My work, my discoveries, my future. The table erupted in congratulations. Mason accepted them with practiced grace, thanking everyone while managing to look both humble and brilliant. "It's really groundbreaking research," Uncle Michael said. "I read the abstract you sent Patricia. Even I could tell it was significant work, and I'm a lawyer, not a doctor." "Mason's always been exceptional," my father added, his voice warm with pride I'd never heard directed at me. "We always knew he'd do great things." This was my moment. If I waited any longer, I'd lose my nerve. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the conversation. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'd like to share something about Mason's research." The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. Mason's smile didn't falter, but I saw his hand tighten around his wine glass. "Emma, sweetie, can this wait until after dessert?" Mom asked, already looking annoyed that I was interrupting Mason's moment. "No," I said. "It can't." I pulled out the evidence packets from my bag and began distributing them around the table. "I've prepared documentation for everyone. What I'm about to share is difficult, but it's important that you all see the evidence." "Evidence of what?" Dad asked, his voice sharp. I placed a packet in front of him, then continued around the table. Claire squeezed my hand as I gave her hers. Grandfather Robert looked confused but intrigued. "Mason's groundbreaking work on protein synthesis is remarkable," I said, returning to my seat. "It's remarkable because it's identical to my undergraduate thesis, which I wrote 6 months before his publication." The silence was deafening. "What?" Mom's voice was faint. "If you open the packets, you'll find side-by-side comparisons of Mason's published paper and my thesis drafts. The similarities aren't coincidental. They're identical down to specific technical terminology that I developed myself." People started opening their packets. I watched their faces as they examined the evidence, the highlighted sections showing word-for-word matches, the timestamp comparisons, the login records. Mason recovered quickly. I had to give him credit for that. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice breaking slightly. Perfect emotional calibration, wounded but trying to be strong. "My own sister is so jealous of my success that she's fabricating evidence to try to destroy my career." Several heads turned from the evidence back to Mason. "This is exactly what I was worried about." He continued, looking at our parents with pleading eyes. "Emma has been struggling academically and socially. I've been trying to help her, encouraging her to seek counseling, but instead she's created this elaborate fiction where I somehow stole her work." He turned to face me directly, and I saw the calculation in his eyes even as tears formed. It's heartbreaking to see my little sister this delusional. I love you, Emma, but you need help. Professional help. It was a masterful performance. I could see the doubt creeping into people's faces. Mason looked genuinely distressed, while I probably looked cold and accusatory. But I'd prepared for this. Page 3 of the packet shows the login records, I said calmly. Mason accessed my university account without authorization on 17 separate occasions over the past year. The IT department confirmed that the IP addresses trace back to his Boston apartment and his phone. Grandfather Robert was studying the documents intently, his engineering mind working through the technical details. These timestamps don't lie, he said slowly. Emma's drafts predate Mason's publication by several months. Dad, surely you're not believing this. My father looked at Grandfather Robert incredulously. Mason is a Harvard graduate. He's a doctor. Emma is an undergraduate student who's clearly having some kind of crisis. I'm looking at the evidence, William, Grandfather Robert said firmly. And the evidence suggests that Mason's work is not original. Mason shifted tactics. The wounded victim approach wasn't working on everyone, so he tried indignation. These documents could easily be faked, he said. Emma is computer savvy. She could have altered timestamps, created false login records. This whole thing is a setup. Why would I do that? I asked quietly. Because you've spent your entire life in my shadow. Mason's voice rose, and for just a second I saw genuine anger break through his careful mask. You've never been as smart as me, as successful as me, as loved as me, and you can't stand it. So you've decided to tear me down with lies. The cruelty in his words landed exactly as he intended. I saw Mom flinch, saw Aunt Sarah look uncomfortable. Even Claire looked shocked by his viciousness. But he wasn't done. I've tried to be a good brother. I've offered advice, tried to help you with your mediocre research, encouraged you to pursue more realistic career goals. And this is how you repay me, by trying to destroy everything I've worked for. Mason, that's enough, Uncle Michael said quietly. He was still reading through the evidence packet, his lawyer's eye catching details. These login records include IP addresses and specific timestamps. That's not easy to fake. Michael, you can't seriously be considering believing her over Mason, my mother said, her voice rising. Mason has never lied to us. He's our golden boy, our pride and joy. There it was, out loud finally. The favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood, spoken plainly for everyone to hear. Patricia, Aunt Sarah said carefully, maybe we should look at the evidence objectively. There is no objectivity here. Mom stood up, her face flushed. This is a sister trying to destroy her brother out of jealousy, and I won't stand for it. Dad stood too, and I watched him transform into the authoritative figure he became in business negotiations. Emma Marie Mitchell, he said, using my full name in that tone that had terrified me as a child. I am disgusted by this behavior. Your brother has worked incredibly hard to build his career, and instead of supporting him, you're trying to tear him down with lies and fabrications. Dad, look at the evidence. The timestamps. Enough, he snapped. Mason is a Harvard graduate completing his medical residency. You're a struggling undergraduate student who clearly can't handle her brother's success. This jealousy and these false accusations end now. My mother moved to stand beside Mason, putting her arm around his shoulders protectively. Sweetie, we love you, but this behavior is unacceptable. Mason has earned everything he's achieved through hard work and brilliance. These conspiracy theories need to stop. I looked around the table. Grandfather Robert was still studying the documents, his face troubled. Uncle Michael looked uncertain, glancing between the evidence and Mason's distressed face. Aunt Sarah seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. Claire was staring at our parents with open disbelief. The others, the more distant relatives, shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to examine the evidence or follow my parents' lead. Family loyalty versus uncomfortable truth. Emma, Dad continued, his voice cold and final. You will apologize to Mason immediately for these false accusations, or we will stop paying your tuition and living expenses. Your education is a privilege we provide, and we won't fund someone who attacks our family with lies. The ultimatum hung in the air like poison gas. Mason watched me with a mixture of triumph and mock concern, already confident in his victory. My parents stood united in their threat, willing to destroy my educational future to protect their golden child's lies. I felt something inside me shift. A clarity I'd never experienced before settled over me like a cool breeze. These people, my parents who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were choosing Mason's lies over my truth. They were willing to financially devastate me to ruin my future rather than consider that their perfect son might be a fraud. The evidence was right there, clear as daylight. Timestamps, login records, side-by-side comparisons that any objective person could verify. But facts didn't matter when they contradicted the family mythology. "Well," Mom demanded, "we're waiting for your apology." I looked at Mason. He was good, I had to admit it. His expression showed just the right amount of hurt mixed with forgiveness in advance. He'd probably already planned his gracious acceptance of my apology, the magnanimous speech about family healing and moving forward. I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me but never really seen me, who had spent 21 years making me feel like I wasn't enough, like I would never measure up to Mason's stolen glory. I looked at the extended family, most of whom were avoiding eye contact, choosing the comfort of neutrality over the discomfort of truth. And then I looked at Claire, who was staring at me with fierce encouragement. At Grandfather Robert, who had set down the evidence packet and was watching me with his sharp engineer's gaze. At Uncle Michael, who looked troubled but was still listening. Not everyone had chosen willful blindness. I smiled. For the first time in months, maybe years, I smiled genuinely. "All right," I said simply. 2 words. That's all I gave them. Then I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard Mason beginning another performance. "Thank you, Emma. I know that was hard for you, but family is what matters most. We can work through this together, get you the help you need." I didn't listen to the rest. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and pulled out my laptop. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that all right wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of the end. I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd created 6 months ago. The label read, Operation Truth. Inside were subfolders, dozens of them, each one meticulously organized, each one representing hours of research, investigation, and preparation. They thought I'd spent the fall semester being antisocial, hiding in my dorm room, avoiding family gatherings. They thought I was struggling, barely keeping up with my classes while Mason soared. They had no idea what I'd actually been doing. It started with something small, something that nagged at me. Mason had come home for Thanksgiving, his usual confident self regaling the family with stories of his medical school triumphs. During dessert, he'd mentioned casually that his high school science fair project had been referenced in a medical journal. "Can you believe it?" he'd said. "Work I did as a teenager is still relevant enough to cite. Professor Chen at BU mentioned it in his latest paper." I remembered that project. I'd been a freshman in high school, eager to impress my older brother. I'd helped him with the initial research, spending hours in the library, finding sources, taking notes, organizing data. Later that night, alone in my dorm room, I'd searched for the journal reference out of curiosity. I found Professor Chen's paper easily enough. It was about enzyme interactions in cellular repair, and yes, he'd cited Mason's high school project. But as I read the methodology Mason had used, something felt off. The approach was sophisticated, too sophisticated for a high school senior, even a brilliant one. The statistical analysis used techniques we hadn't learned until college-level courses. I started digging. It took me 3 hours, but I found it a paper published by a graduate student at Northwestern University, published 2 weeks before our state's science fair submission deadline. The methodology was nearly identical to Mason's project. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Mason had read the paper and adapted the approach. Maybe it was parallel thinking, but the statistical formulas were copied directly. The specific control groups, the data analysis techniques, all of it matched too perfectly to be coincidence. I sat in my dorm room at 2 a.m. staring at my screen, feeling my worldview cracking. If Mason had cheated on his high school science fair project, the project that had won him a Harvard scholarship, what else had he lied about? I spent Thanksgiving weekend creating a spreadsheet. Every major academic achievement Mason had claimed since high school. Science fairs, research papers, his undergraduate thesis publications from medical school. 43 entries in total. Then I started investigating. One by one, I cross-referenced his work with published research student databases, online academic repositories. By Christmas break, I'd found evidence of plagiarism or fraudulent collaboration in 11 cases. By February, I'd documented 17 instances spanning 7 years. The pattern was clear. Mason hadn't just stolen my work. He was a serial academic plagiarist who had built his entire reputation on other people's research. But discovering the fraud was only the first step. I needed to understand how he was doing it, and more importantly, how to stop him without destroying my own life in the process. That's when I reached out to Jake Martinez, the IT guy who'd helped me with organic chemistry. "Emma, what you're asking me to do could get me fired," Jake had said when I explained what I needed. "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. My brother has been stealing my research. I need to prove how he's accessing my account." Jake had studied my face for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely," he'd sighed. "Give me a week." 10 days later, he handed me a USB drive containing evidence that made my stomach turn. Mason hadn't just accessed my account a few times during family visits. He'd been systematically hacking into it for over a year. He'd set up automated scripts to download any new files I created, monitoring my research in real time. Every time I saved a draft, he got a copy. Every time I made a breakthrough, he knew about it before my own advisor did. "This is beyond academic dishonesty," Jake had said quietly. "This is systematic data theft, possibly criminal." That's when I realized the true scope of what I was dealing with. Mason wasn't just a cheater looking for shortcuts. He was a predator who had turned academic fraud into a system. By spring, I'd expanded my investigation beyond Mason's theft of my work. If he'd been stealing this long, there had to be other victims. Claire helped me network through her MIT connections. We found Dr. Rachel Santos first. "Your brother is a sociopath," she'd told me bluntly over coffee in Cambridge. "He stole my pediatric cardiology research while I was on medical leave dealing with my mother's cancer. When I came back and saw my work published under his name, I tried to report it." "What happened?" "He convinced the department that we'd been collaborating, and I was trying to take sole credit because I was bitter about personal issues." Her voice was tight with old anger. "They believed him. The golden boy with the perfect record versus the woman who'd taken a leave for family problems. Guess who won?" "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, stop him." That's what I couldn't do. Find the other victims, build a case so ironclad that even his charm can't save him. We found Michael Torres next, then Jennifer Kim, then David Okonkwo. 4 medical students Mason had collaborated with, then systematically excluded from publications. 4 people whose careers had been damaged or derailed by his theft. Each one told a similar story. Mason was charming, brilliant, helpful, right, until he submitted papers with only his name on them, claiming the work was primarily his with minor contributions from others. "The system protects people like him," Michael Torres had said bitterly. "He knew how to work it, knew how to seem like the primary contributor even when he'd done maybe 20% of the work. And when we tried to push back, we looked like we were trying to ride his coattails." By the end of March, I had documented evidence of Mason stealing from or defrauding at least 8 different people over 7 years. That's when the Georgetown opportunity appeared, almost like fate. I'd been researching universities with strong biochemistry programs, looking for escape routes from my parents' financial control. Georgetown's combined MD-PhD program was perfect, prestigious enough to be impressive, far enough from Massachusetts to feel like freedom. But I couldn't apply while relying on my parents' money. Mason would find out, and he'd convince them to sabotage my application somehow. So I found a part-time research position with a pharmaceutical company doing legitimate drug development work. 20 hours a week, enough to start building savings. It meant brutal hours, full course load research position, my own thesis work, but I didn't care. Every dollar I saved was a dollar toward independence. I spent April and May working on my Georgetown application. I submitted my original research, not the work Mason had stolen, but new innovations I'd developed specifically for this application. I had it independently verified by professors who had no connection to my family. In June, I got the acceptance letter. Full academic scholarship, research fellowship, combined MD-PhD program. Georgetown wanted me. Not because of my family name, not because of connections, but because my research was genuinely innovative. I'd cried in my dorm room when I read that email. Cried because someone somewhere saw my actual worth. The spring and fall were a careful balancing act. I continued my research, maintained my 4.0 GPA, worked my pharmaceutical job, saved money, and built my case against Mason. I found an apartment near Georgetown's campus. Signed a lease starting January 1st. Paid first month last month and security deposit with money I'd earned myself. I prepared institutional reports for Harvard, Massachusetts General Hospital, the Massachusetts Medical Board, and 3 medical journals. Each report was customized, professional, comprehensive. For Harvard, documentation of academic fraud spanning 7 years, including theft from other students and falsification of original work. For MGH evidence that Mason had used stolen research to develop patient treatment protocols, including specific cases where his lack of understanding of the underlying science could have led to errors. For the medical board's systematic pattern of fraud that called into question his fitness to practice medicine. For the journal's requests for retraction based on plagiarism and fabricated data. I even drafted personal emails to each member of my extended family explaining why I felt compelled to report Mason's fraud. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't sibling rivalry, it was about protecting future victims and ensuring patient safety. By December, everything was ready. All the evidence compiled, all the reports prepared, all the emails drafted and scheduled. I had one job left: give Mason and my parents a chance to do the right thing. That's what Christmas Eve dinner was about. One last opportunity for them to see the truth, acknowledge the fraud, and handle it as a family before the institutions got involved. They'd failed that test spectacularly. Now, sitting in my bedroom while my family probably discussed my mental health crisis downstairs, I reviewed the final preparations. All emails were scheduled to auto-send at 8:00 a.m. Christmas morning. In 9 hours, evidence packets would arrive at institutions across the country, beginning investigations that would likely end Mason's medical career. My bags were packed. Only items I'd purchased myself: clothes, books, my laptop, research materials. I was leaving behind anything that represented my parents' financial support. Clean break. The Georgetown acceptance letter sat prominently on my desk next to printed confirmations of my scholarship, my research position, my apartment lease. I wanted my parents to see it when they came to confront me. Wanted them to understand that their threats were meaningless because I'd already arranged my independence. I pulled up my email and did a final review of the scheduled sends. 47 emails in total, all timed to arrive simultaneously at 8:00 a.m. Harvard Medical School Academic Integrity Board, Massachusetts General Hospital Administration, Massachusetts Medical Board, the editors of 3 major medical journals, the 14 members of my extended family, Dr. Rachel Santos, Michael Torres, Jennifer Kim, and David Okonkwo, Mason's other victims who deserved to know that someone was finally holding him accountable. My finger hovered over the Confirm Schedule button. This was it. The point of no return. Once these emails sent, Mason's world would collapse. My parents would be devastated, possibly financially ruined by the lawsuits and demands for restitution. The family would fracture, and I would be the one who caused it all. I thought about backing out. Thought about deleting everything, accepting my Georgetown scholarship, and just disappearing quietly. But then I thought about the 70-year-old woman Mason had mentioned treating last month. Complex case that required some creative problem-solving, he'd said proudly. What if his creative problem-solving was based on stolen research he didn't fully understand? What if his fraudulent protocols hurt someone? I thought about Dr. Santos, whose career had been damaged. About Michael Torres struggling to graduate because Mason had stolen his publications. I thought about all the future students Mason would cheat, all the future patients he might harm if someone didn't stop him. Predators don't stop until someone stops them. I clicked Confirm Schedule. The system confirmed 47 emails scheduled for delivery at 8:00 a.m. December 25th. It was done. I leaned back in my chair and released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be living a lie or enabling Mason's fraud. The truth was about to be revealed, and I was ready to face the consequences of choosing integrity over family loyalty. I showered, changed into pajamas, and tried to sleep. It was impossible. My mind kept running through scenarios, imagining Mason's face when he saw the emails my parents shocked the institutional responses. At 3:00 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee. From my bedroom window, I watched the neighborhood sleep houses dark, except for Christmas lights. Everything peaceful and still. In 5 hours, that peace would shatter. I pulled up my laptop one more time and opened a document I'd been writing sporadically over the past months. It was titled, Why I Reported My Brother's Academic Fraud, a Personal Statement. I'd started it as therapy, a way to process my feelings. But now I realized it might be important documentation. If Mason tried to paint me as mentally unstable or vindictive, I wanted a clear record of my motivations written before the fallout began. I read through what I'd written. I am not doing this because I'm jealous of Mason's success. I'm doing this because his success is built on theft, and that theft has consequences beyond our family. I'm doing this because Dr. Rachel Santos deserves justice. Because Michael Torres, Jennifer Kim, and David Okonkwo deserve to have their work recognized. Because future students deserve to be evaluated fairly, not to have their work stolen by someone they trust. I'm doing this because patients at Massachusetts General Hospital deserve to be treated using protocols based on real research, not plagiarized and possibly misunderstood data. And yes, I'm doing this because I deserve better than to watch my brother build his career on my research while I'm dismissed as mediocre. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And it's long overdue. I added one final paragraph. To my parents, I know you won't understand this decision. You've spent my entire life believing Mason is perfect, and I'm disappointing. But I hope someday you'll realize that protecting the truth, even when it's painful, is more important than protecting comfortable lies. I love you both, but I love integrity more. I saved the document and backed it up to 3 different cloud storage services. Mason had taught me the importance of redundancy, even if he'd learned that lesson while stealing my work. At 7:00 a.m., I heard movement downstairs. My parents were waking up. Soon they'd come to my room, probably to discuss last night's dinner and my need for professional help. I got dressed jeans, a Georgetown t-shirt I'd bought secretly online, comfortable shoes. Whatever happened today, I wanted to be ready to leave quickly if necessary. At 7:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Claire, you okay? Last night was intense. Me, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Claire, your parents are pretty upset. They think you need therapy. Me, they're about to be a lot more upset. Check your email around 8:15. Claire, Emma, what did you do? What I had to. Thanks for believing me. Claire, always. Whatever happens, I'm on your side. I checked the time. 7:52 a.m. 8 minutes until the email's sent. 8 minutes until Mason's carefully constructed world began to crumble. 8 minutes until my family discovered that their troubled daughter had been planning their golden boy's downfall for the past 6 months. I opened my laptop and watched the send queue. The progress bar showed scheduled sends 47, time remaining 7 minutes. My door opened without a knock. Mom stood there, Dad right behind her. Emma, we need to talk about your behavior last night. Mom started her voice tight. Your accusations against Mason were completely unacceptable. I understand you're upset. Dad interrupted, his business negotiation voice firmly in place. But we're willing to get you help. We've already researched therapists who specialize in delusional disorders. I don't need therapy, I said calmly, still watching my laptop screen. And in about 5 minutes, you're going to understand why. They looked at each other confused. Emma, this defiance isn't helping, Mom said. We're trying to support you, but you need to take responsibility for your false accusations and apologize to your brother. My accusations aren't false, and I'm not apologizing. The laptop screen showed scheduled sends 47, time remaining 2 minutes. Then we're done paying for your education, Dad said flatly. Effective immediately. You can move back home and get a job, or you can figure it out on your own. But we won't fund someone who attacks our family. Okay, I said simply. They stared at me. Okay, Mom repeated. That's all you have to say, Emma. Do you understand what we're telling you? No more tuition. No more living expenses. No more... The laptop chimed. Scheduled sends 47. Status delivered. I looked up at my parents and smiled. You should probably check your email, I said. You both have some reading to do. My parents stood frozen in my bedroom doorway, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. What do you mean, check our email? Dad asked slowly. I gestured to my laptop screen where the delivery confirmations were still visible. At exactly 8:00 a.m., 47 emails were sent to various recipients. Harvard Medical School, Massachusetts General Hospital, the Massachusetts Medical Board, 3 medical journals, and every member of our extended family. Each email contains comprehensive documentation of Mason's academic fraud spanning the past 7 years. Mom's face went white. You didn't. I did. Emma, please tell me you're joking, Dad said, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. He sounded almost pleading. I'm not joking. Every institution that's certified, employed, or published Mason now has evidence of systematic plagiarism, data theft, and fraudulent research. They also have documentation showing that he used stolen research to develop patient treatment protocols. Patient treatment protocols. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Before I could respond, we heard a crash from downstairs. Then Mason's voice raised in panic. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! My parents rushed out of my room. I followed calmly, carrying my laptop. Mason was in the kitchen, his phone in one hand, staring at the screen with an expression of absolute horror. His other hand had dropped his coffee mug, which lay shattered on the tile floor, dark liquid spreading across the white surface like blood. "Mason, honey, what's wrong?" Mom rushed to him, crunching across broken ceramic. He looked up at her, then at me standing in the doorway. His face transformed from shock to fury in an instant. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "What the fuck did you do, Emma?" I'd never heard Mason swear in front of our parents before. He'd always been so carefully controlled, so perfectly polished. "I sent the evidence I showed you yesterday to the appropriate authorities," I said calmly. "Harvard, your hospital, the medical board, the journals. They deserve to know." His phone buzzed again, and again. Each notification made him flinch like he was being physically struck. They're all... He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped his phone. Dad grabbed Mason's phone and looked at the screen. I watched his expression change as he scrolled through the notifications. "Harvard Medical School Academic Integrity Office." Dad read aloud, his voice hollow. "Massachusetts General Hospital Administration. Massachusetts Medical Board. Journal of Medical Research Editorial Board." He looked up at Mason. "What is this?" "She sent them everything," Mason said, his voice rising to near hysteria. "Every institution, every..." His phone buzzed again. "They're calling for emergency investigations. Harvard wants me in Cambridge tomorrow morning. The hospital..." "Oh God, the hospital suspended me." "Suspended?" Mom grabbed his arm. "What do you mean, suspended?" Mason's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Helen Zhang, MGH. "Answer it," Dad commanded, "and put it on speaker. We need to hear what they're saying." With trembling hands, Mason answered. "Dr. Zhang, I can explain." "Dr. Mitchell, this is not a conversation about explanations." Dr. Zhang's voice was crisp, professional, and absolutely cold. "I'm calling to formally notify you that your residency has been suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation into allegations of academic fraud and research misconduct." "Dr. Zhang, my sister is having mental health issues. She's fabricated evidence because she's jealous." "Dr. Mitchell, I've spent the past 45 minutes reviewing the documentation that was sent to our administration. This includes login records showing unauthorized access to university databases, time-stamped comparisons of your published work with original sources, and evidence of systematic plagiarism dating back to your time at Harvard Medical School." The kitchen was silent except for the sound of Mason's ragged breathing. Dr. Zhang continued. "This is not a family dispute, Dr. Mitchell. This is a serious case of academic and professional misconduct with potential implications for patient safety." "Patient safety." Dad's voice cracked on the words. "Who is this?" Dr. Zhang asked sharply. "This is William Mitchell Mason's father. Please, there must be some mistake." "Mr. Mitchell, I understand this is difficult to hear, but your son's research has been used to develop treatment protocols that have been applied to actual patients. We've identified at least 3 cases where medications or dosages were based on Dr. Mitchell's published work. Given the evidence that this work was plagiarized, we must review every case to ensure no harm was done." Mom made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. "The hospital's legal team is already assembling," Dr. Zhang continued. "Dr. Mitchell, you are required to report to Boston tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. for a formal review. Bring legal representation if you wish. Additionally, the Massachusetts Medical Board has opened a parallel investigation that could result in permanent revocation of your medical license." The call ended. Mason slowly lowered the phone, staring at nothing. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." His phone rang again, then Mom's phone, then Dad's. The extended family was responding. Dad answered his phone with a shaking hand. It was Grandfather Robert. "William, I just received an email from Emma with extensive documentation about Mason's academic record. Please tell me there's an explanation for this." Dad put the call on speaker. "Dad, Emma is having some kind of breakdown. She's fabricated evidence. William, I'm an engineer. I know how to read timestamps and analyze data. These documents show a clear pattern of plagiarism. Emma's research drafts predate Mason's publications by months in every case. But Mason graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. With stolen work, apparently. William, I've been reviewing the evidence for the past hour. The login records alone are damning. Mason accessed Emma's university account 17 times without authorization. That's not fabrication. That's documented fact. Mason's phone buzzed with another notification. His face went even paler as he read it. "Harvard wants their scholarship money back," he whispered. "All of it. $253,000 plus damages and administrative costs." Mom swayed on her feet. Dad caught her arm, his own face ashen. "Dad, I'll call you back," William said and ended the call. The kitchen descended into chaos. Mason's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Mom was crying. Dad was pacing, trying to call their family lawyer. I stood in the doorway watching my family's perfect world crumble and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no vindication. Just a strange, hollow calm. Mason looked up at me, and for the first time I saw him without the mask. No charm, no confidence, no calculated manipulation. Just raw fear and desperation. "You vindictive bitch," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You've destroyed everything. Everything. And for what? Because I'm successful, and you're a failure." "Because you're a fraud," I corrected calmly. "And because your fraud was putting patients at risk." "Patients at risk." He laughed, a broken sound. "I'm a good doctor. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" I pulled out my phone and opened a document. 3 patients received treatment based on your protein synthesis research. One of them was a 70-year-old woman with heart problems. You modified the dosage recommendations from the research you stole, but you didn't understand the underlying mathematics because you never did the actual work. The room went silent. "She received double the recommended dose of blood thinners," I continued. "If another doctor hadn't questioned your protocol, she could have had serious bleeding complications. They caught it in time, but she could have died, Mason. Died because you used research you stole and didn't fully understand." Mom made a choking sound. Dad stopped pacing. That's not," Mason stammered, but he couldn't finish the sentence. "The hospital is reviewing every patient case you've been involved with for the past 2 years, I said. "Every treatment protocol, every medication dosage, every clinical decision based on your innovative research. How many other mistakes are they going to find?" Mason's phone rang again. He looked at the caller ID and his knees actually buckled. Dad caught him before he fell. "It's the police," Mason said, his voice barely audible. "The Boston police want to interview me about potential fraud charges." Over the next hour, the house became a war zone of phone calls, accusations, and desperate attempts at damage control. Uncle Michael called Dad, his lawyer's training clear in his calm, methodical questions. "William, I've reviewed the evidence Emma sent. From a legal standpoint, this is serious. Harvard can and will demand restitution. The hospital could pursue malpractice claims. The criminal fraud charges alone could result in felony convictions." Aunt Sarah called Mom, her voice gentle but firm. "Patricia, I know this is hard to hear, but the evidence is compelling. I think we need to accept that Mason has done something very wrong." Claire texted me, "Holy shit, Emma. The family group chat is exploding. Half of them are supporting you. The other half thinks you've lost your mind. But Grandpa Robert just sent a message defending you. He said intellectual property theft is still theft, family or not." I texted back, "Thank you for believing me. Claire always. But Em, your parents look devastated. Just wanted you to know." I glanced into the living room where Mom and Dad sat on the couch, shell-shocked and aging before my eyes. Part of me wanted to comfort them, to explain that I hadn't wanted any of this, that I'd given them a chance to handle it privately, that they'd forced my hand. But a larger part of me remembered 21 years of being invisible, of being compared unfavorably to a fraud, of having my achievements dismissed while Mason's stolen glory was celebrated. They'd made their choice. Now they had to live with the consequences. Mason's phone rang again. It was Dr. Margaret Chen from Harvard Medical School's Office of Academic Integrity. "Don't answer it," Dad said. "We need to talk to a lawyer first." "I have to," Mason said dully. "Ignoring them will only make it worse." He answered on speaker, his voice hollow. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Mitchell, I'm calling to inform you that after an emergency review of the evidence submitted this morning, the Harvard Medical School Faculty Committee has voted to revoke your medical degree effective immediately." Mom gasped. Dad closed his eyes. "The scope and duration of your academic fraud makes this the most serious case of research misconduct in our institution's 237-year history. We've identified plagiarism in your undergraduate thesis, multiple medical school papers, and your doctoral research. The evidence is irrefutable." "Dr. Chen, please." Mason's voice broke. Additionally, Harvard University is demanding immediate repayment of all scholarship funds provided during your 4 years of medical school. The total amount, including administrative costs and damages, is $253,000. Our legal department will contact you within 48 hours to discuss repayment arrangements. We consider this theft of educational services through fraud. We don't have that kind of money, Dad said, his voice cracking. I understand this creates financial hardship, Mr. Mitchell. However, your son obtained his medical education through systematic fraud. The university has a legal and ethical obligation to recover these funds. If payment arrangements cannot be made, we will pursue civil litigation. The call ended. Mason slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. My life is over. Everything I've worked for, everything you stole, I said quietly from the doorway. He looked up at me with pure hatred. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. I'll tell everyone you're mentally unstable. I'll ruin your reputation, your chances at Georgetown, everything. Georgetown already knows, I interrupted. I disclosed everything to them before I submitted my application. They reviewed my original research independently and verified it was my own work. That's why they gave me a full scholarship. The color drained from his face. You've been planning this for months. 6 months, actually, since I found your first theft. Mom looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Emma, how could you do this to your own brother, to your family? How could I felt something inside me crack. How could you? You knew something was wrong. The evidence was right there on Christmas Eve, and you chose to believe Mason's lies over documented proof. You threatened to destroy my education, my future, to protect his fraud. He's your brother, and I'm your daughter. The words burst out of me raw and painful. I've been your daughter for 21 years, and you've never once chosen me over him. Never once believed in me, supported me, or seen me as anything other than the disappointing child who wasn't Mason. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't bother wiping them away. I gave you a chance. I showed you the evidence, gave you the opportunity to handle this privately as a family, but you couldn't see past your golden child worship long enough to acknowledge the truth. So yes, I went to the authorities, because patients deserve better than to be treated by a fraud. Because Dr. Santos and Michael Torres and all the other people Mason victimized deserve justice. And because I deserve better than to watch my brother build his career on my stolen research while you tell me I'm mediocre. The living room was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing and Mom's quiet sobs. Dad looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Horror, maybe, or shame. Emma, we didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. The rest of Christmas Day was a blur of phone calls, emails, and devastating revelations. The Massachusetts Medical Board called to schedule an emergency hearing for December 27th. Mason's medical license was temporarily suspended pending their investigation. The Journal of Medical Research sent a retraction notice publicly acknowledging that Mason's published work contained plagiarized material. Harvard's legal department sent formal notification of their intent to pursue full restitution plus damages with a deadline of January 15th for initial payment arrangements. And then the call that changed everything. Mason's phone rang at 3:30 p.m. Dr. Zhang again. Dr. Mitchell, I'm calling with an update on our patient review. We've completed preliminary analysis of the 3 cases treated using your protein synthesis protocols. Everyone in the room froze. The 70-year-old patient we discussed earlier, Mrs. Dorothy Patterson, received double the recommended dosage of anticoagulants based on your modified calculations. We've confirmed that your modifications were based on incomplete understanding of the original research methodology. Is she okay? Mason's voice was barely a whisper. She's stable, but only because Dr. James Rodriguez questioned your protocol and ordered additional testing. Without his intervention, Mrs. Patterson would likely have suffered a major hemorrhagic event within 48 hours, potentially fatal. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. Additionally, Dr. Zhang continued, her voice hard, we've discovered that you applied similar modified protocols to 2 other patients. Both cases are being reviewed for potential malpractice. The hospital's legal team is preparing for significant liability claims. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, Mason said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely remorseful rather than just scared. I thought I understood the research. That's the problem, Dr. Mitchell. You thought you understood research you'd stolen rather than conducted yourself. Your lack of foundational knowledge created dangerous gaps in your clinical judgment. You put patients at risk because you were too arrogant to admit you didn't fully understand the work you'd plagiarized. The call ended. Mason sat motionless, the full weight of what he'd done finally settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his career anymore. This was about real people whose lives he'd endangered. "Oh, God," he whispered. "I could have killed someone." Grandfather Robert arrived at the house around 4:00 p.m. He walked in without knocking, took one look at Mason's devastated face, and said, "Good. You're beginning to understand the consequences of your choices." "Dad," William started, but Grandfather Robert held up his hand. "No, William. I've spent the day reviewing every piece of evidence Emma compiled. The scope of Mason's fraud is staggering. He didn't just steal from his sister. He stole from classmates, from research partners, from published papers. He built his entire career on other people's work, and now real patients have been harmed because he used research he didn't understand." He turned to Mason. "You're 25 years old. You've spent 7 years of your life lying, stealing, and manipulating everyone around you. And when your sister tried to expose the truth, you threatened to destroy her life to protect your fraud." "Grandpa, I'm not finished. You used your charm, your family's support, and the system's bias toward brilliant young doctors to commit systematic fraud. And when Emma showed courage in reporting you, your parents threatened to cut off her education rather than face the truth about their golden child." He looked at Mom and Dad, disappointment clear in his weathered face. "I raised you better than this, William. Patricia, I expected better from you. You had documented evidence of serious academic fraud, and you chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. We were trying to protect our family," Mom started, "by attacking the one family member with integrity, by threatening Emma's future to preserve Mason's fraud." Grandfather Robert shook his head. "That's not protection. That's enabling. And it ends now." He walked over to where I stood by the window and put his hand on my shoulder. "Emma, I'm proud of you. What you did took remarkable courage. You protected patients, defended your own work, and stood up for principle, even when it cost you everything." I felt tears sting my eyes again. "Thank you, Grandpa." "Don't thank me for doing what any decent person should do, acknowledging the truth." As evening fell on the worst Christmas our family had ever experienced, Mason sat alone in the living room, his phone silent for the first time in hours. The barrage of calls and emails had finally slowed. I found him staring at nothing, his face blank with shock. "Emma," he said without looking at me, "I need to ask you something." I waited. "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you, Mason. I'm devastated by what you've done, and I'm angry about the years of manipulation. But I don't hate you. I hope someday you'll actually deal with why you felt the need to steal instead of doing your own work. I hope you'll make amends to the people you've hurt. And I hope you'll become someone better than the fraud you've been." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo the harm I've caused. But I am so sorry, Emma. You deserved better than what I did to you." It wasn't enough. It couldn't possibly be enough to make up for 7 years of theft and manipulation, but it was a start. "I know," I said quietly. "Now you need to apologize to everyone else you've hurt, starting with Mrs. Patterson, the woman who almost died because of your arrogance." I left him there and went back to my room to finish packing. Tomorrow morning I would leave this house and start my new life at Georgetown. My parents might eventually forgive me, or they might not. Mason might actually change, or he might not. But I had done what needed to be done. I had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over approval, and justice over family loyalty. And for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely free.